On the 31st of October 2008, the residents of the Valley View Apartments in Redmond, Washington held a Halloween party. One of the attendees, Arpana Jinaga, went attired in a Little Red Riding Hood costume. That night, 4 apartments at the complex had been selected to become themed settings. Arpana's was one of them and had been decorated as a haunted forest. The party started and continued for a time like any other. Things did not, however, stay this way. A number of arguments erupted and several individuals were asked to leave. After their exit, things settled down and the party ended peacefully. Like most of the other guests, Arpana said her goodbyes. These farewells would be the last words uttered publicly by the gifted software engineer from India. Over the weekend, nobody heard from her, but at 9 a.m. the following Monday, police received a call. According to the caller, a body had been found in an apartment. Police arrived shortly thereafter and instantly noticed that the front door had been kicked in. They also smelled the strong scent of cleaning agents as soon as they entered the premises. Officers would walk down a small hallway, taking in their surroundings. There was clear signs of struggle everywhere. When police arrived at the bedroom, they discovered the body of Arpana Jinaga lying on the floor. Her body was doused in bleach and she had clearly been strangled. After examining the scene and collecting evidence, police naturally sought information relating to the last time she was seen. All the guests who had attended the party were rounded up and questioned. They reported that the argument previously mentioned started when one of the guests made a, quote, race-related comment, unquote, to Arpana. From most accounts, she brushed this off and got back to enjoying herself. The party continued into the early hours of November 1st, and by 3 a.m, the revellers began to leave the first floor apartments. She did the same and returned to the 3rd floor where her apartment was located. Over the next number of hours, neighbours on either side of Arpana heard noises. They believed them to be the sounds of an individual engaged in what they presumed to be consensual sexual relations. One neighbour, named Kyle Orr in court documents, stated that at 8 a.m, he was awoken by horrible growling sounds which lasted for approximately 20 seconds. These sounds were followed by a thud. Following these strange sounds, he heard the water running in her apartment for about an hour. As stated, the apartment was in disarray when police arrived. It was clear to investigators that the killer had gained entry through the front door using brute force. When inside, a struggle took place before he subdued and sexually assaulted Arpana in her bedroom. After committing this grotesque deed, he strangled her and then poured both bleach and motor oil over her body in a clear attempt to destroy any physical evidence that may lead police to him. In addition to pouring bleach and motor oil on her body, the killer also cleaned certain areas of the apartment and set fire to a number of items. During a search of the surrounding area, police found a bottle of motor oil in one of the apartment complex's garbage containers. It was the oil that Arpana used for her motorcycle. The oil was found in a plastic bag which also contained Arpana's Halloween costume, a blood-stained bathrobe and sheets from her bed. Conspicuously missing from the scene was Arpana's Suzuki GS 500, and police speculated that the killer had taken it. However, it was soon located at a repair shop where she had taken it days before her untimely demise. When the autopsy report was made public, it made for grim reading. Arpana had been brutally treated. Her cause of death was strangulation, and a bootlace had been used. It's believed that the motor oil found on her body was intended to act as an accelerant, but motor oil isn't an accelerant. Naturally, the circumstances of her death led to a lot of anger and frustration amongst the Indian community. This was made all the worse when any progress appeared to have stalled. A noticeable silence continued for 2 years, but eventually progress seemed to be on the horizon when police announced in October 2010 that a press conference related to the death of Arpana would take place. In this press conference, Kings County authorities pointed the finger at one Emmanuel de Melvin Fair, a convicted criminal who had served time for drugs and firearms-related crimes. He was also a convicted sex offender. In October 2010, he was in the McNeil Island Corrections Facility for failing to update his sex offender registration. At the time of Arpana's murder, Fair was a free man. In fact, he was couch-surfing in the same apartment complex as her. The woman he was staying with lied to police about his presence during the initial investigation. Police interest in Fair became more pronounced when they noticed him in social media photos at the very same Halloween party attended by Arpana. During police interviews, he admitted talking to Arpana briefly at the party, but denied any involvement in her murder. Though authorities considered him a good fit, they had no hard evidence against him. This would eventually come in 2010 when results from a forensic analysis came back from the Washington State Crime Lab. DNA from the crime scene had been found that matched that of Emmanuel Fair. The DNA was on a number of items known to have been touched by the killer. This included DNA recovered from her neck, the tape used to gag her, and a bloody robe that was found in the apartment's garbage bin. On top of the DNA evidence, a number of inconsistencies stood out as pertinent to investigators. Fair had told them during interviews that he had returned to the apartment of the woman he was staying with at 1 a.m. However, phone calls indicated otherwise. Between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m, he made a number of phone calls to women. This included a phone call to the woman he said he was residing with at the time. This is the woman who lived at the same apartment complex as Arpana. Prosecutors would later hone in on these phone calls during the trial. In the meantime, they stated that this period of several hours had never been adequately accounted for, and this, aligned with the DNA evidence, was enough for authorities to charge Fair with first-degree murder. Fair's attorneys got to work quickly and began sowing seeds of doubt. Their main line of defence was to turn the attention of the public towards other suspects and persons of interest. We will later see that this was more than warranted. They claimed that Emmanuel had been singled out as a top suspect from the beginning, and this singling out was heavily influenced by the colour of his skin. In order to further drive this point home, they drew attention to the different methods of interrogation used by police when dealing with their client. From their point of view, the other suspects and persons of interest were white men who had been treated with, quote, kid gloves, unquote, while their client had been treated with a notable hostility. During the trial, the prosecution focused on the items that were found to have DNA on them. In their eyes, the killer was the only one who could have left these traces. They also pointed out that Fair may have not been a lone accomplice. A neighbour of Arpana's who attended the party admitted to having spent time with Emmanuel on the night of the murder. The defence counsel utilised the prosecution's own suspicions that Emmanuel had not acted alone. In court, they highlighted the fact that the DNA of a number of men had been found at the scene. For example, the semen of an unnamed neighbour was found on a towel that lay close to the body of Arpana. Even the bootlace used to strangle her had DNA from yet another unnamed neighbour. This second neighbour was ruled out as he had an alibi, and he was not a guest at the party that night. With the defence being able to mount a strong case for others being involved, the jury was unable to reach a verdict of guilty or not guilty. In the end, they asked for a retrial. This was granted. The retrial was scheduled for September 2017, but the prosecution then requested that they be given more time to build a case implicating Arpana's next-door neighbour. Fair's defence attorney reacted strongly against the possibility of a trial involving his client and the neighbour on the basis that it was unconstitutional. It was also pointed out that this act on the part of the defence illustrated that though there was DNA evidence implicating his client, there was just as much forensic evidence pointing towards others. Not only had the neighbour's DNA been found, he had been strongly suspected of involvement. Firstly, he lived next door to Arpana, and they had, in his own words, a close relationship. Secondly, the defence zeroed in on this neighbour's admission that he had stopped taking prescribed medicine for an unknown mental illness. The defence drew attention to the investigator's failure to ask what the medication was or what illness it was used to treat. Thirdly, on the night of the murder, the neighbour arrived late and was drunk. He also admitted to being attracted to Arpana and, in his words, wished to, and I quote, hook up, unquote, with her. In one of his interviews, he told police, and I quote, "She looked really good. I hadn't seen her for months. I'd never thought about her like that prior to the night of the Halloween party," unquote. Additionally, this neighbour told police that he had returned to his apartment at midnight and went to sleep, but phone records show he called Arpana twice without reply on her part, once at 2:56 a.m. and a second time at 3:02 a.m. When questioned about these phone calls, he told police he couldn't remember making them. He was also one of the neighbours that told police he heard moaning sounds coming from Arpana's apartment. Yet another aspect of the case that the defence brought up was the fact that a neighbour at the complex saw someone standing in the doorway of Arpana's apartment. This person was not black. When investigators asked if he had gone to Arpana's at this time, his reply to them was, "I don't think so." The strange behaviour doesn't stop there. On the morning of the murder, he took a trip to the Canadian border with the intention of crossing it. However, he was turned away as he didn't have a passport. When police asked why he had done this, he stated that he was, and I quote, "kind of wanting to explore," unquote. Finally, this neighbour's DNA was found on the motor oil bottle and the robe. As we know, motor oil was used in a probable attempt to light Arpana's body on fire. It seems likely that whoever put it in the garbage was her killer, or one of them at least. This is why the prosecution wanted to try the neighbour alongside Emmanuel Fair. This ended up strengthening the defence's reasonable doubt argument, and their client was found not guilty on the 11th of June 2019. One member of the jury had the following to say, and I quote, "I think that was the biggest thing, reasonable doubt, and no one could eliminate him as the killer. We found Fair not guilty because of reasonable doubt, not because we thought he was completely innocent." A few hours after the not guilty verdict, Emmanuel Fair was released from custody after 9 years awaiting the verdict. We end the video there, but first a few words on Arpana. While researching the case, we came across a host of people she had made an impression on. Members of our motorcycle club described her as a person who made an impression straight away. She was somebody who loved life, chased her dreams, one of those dreams being a working life in the US. Should she have been given the time, we can only imagine what she might have achieved. Those possibilities were taken away by a monster.